Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's been requested that I try and recap and reaffirm the motion going forward. So here we go. I move the following. The Investment Committee approves Pillars 3 and 4 in concept and directs staff to include them in the update to the private equity strategic business model. The committee directs staff to develop the structure and guiding principles of the new pillars to be in compliance with the board's investment beliefs and policies. The committee recognizes that staff may propose policy changes for committee approval. Staff will seek to identify and negotiate with capable partners. Expenditures on development of Pillars 3 and 4 will be managed with the existing INVO budget. The committee will receive, at a minimum, quarterly progress reports, including any executed external contracts. Prior to committee approval of a final implementation and funding plan, staff will supply the committee a prudent person opinion. Any commitments for funding investments will require a final vote by this committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, hopefully that gives clarity so everybody understands, because it's somewhat of a lengthy motion. We have members of the public who wish to address us, and a member has requested, and I'm granting 4 minutes, so that means on this particular agenda item, 8A, the speakers will have up to 4 minutes, but I encourage you, if you can make your remarks in 3 or under, it would be appreciated. So the first 3 people, and you can occupy these chairs so that we can move expeditiously, Mr. Jelensik, Mr. Darby, and Mr. Soares. You may proceed.
I'm J.J. Jelensik, a retiree. You're being asked to approve in concept what the technology industry calls vaporware. Before you approve it, you should know what it is. No one should have to point out to you that your fiduciaries and the trust documents give you the authority and responsibility to invest the assets of the trust. You may use agents, but that does not relieve you of your responsibilities. In order to approve this, you must find it prudent to reject all the academic research in order to accept the industry sales pitch based on your expertise. In a search for the same level of returns, you must find it to be prudent to prefer higher fees over lower fees, less liquidity over more liquidity, prefer less transparency over more transparency, prefer unknown and unquantifiable risk over defined and identified risk. You're being asked to find it prudent to give trust assets to a company that you do not own, who will talk to your staff, but will take direction from neither you nor your staff. The company will partner with an LLC, which you will not own, to purchase undisclosed companies. These entities, and not the trust, will own the assets. You have been told numerous times that you must get the governance right. In order to approve this concept, you must find that it is prudent and consistent with your duty of loyalty to the beneficiaries to abdicate control and oversight. In order to approve this concept, you must find that Warren Buffett, who you claim to be your model, is imprudent in disclosing what companies he invests in. If you approve this model, you will be finding all of your current managers imprudent for issuing press releases when they purchase companies. If you believe your current PE managers are imprudent and you do not fire them, then you are in major breach of both your duty of prudence and loyalty. Every time this, I hate to, or at least hesitate to call it a plan, is discussed in public, it changes. It's a good thing because this plan cannot stand up to sunshine. STRS is to be commended for developing much of its co-investment plan in the open. This has permitted the beneficiaries to know what the trustees are doing with their money, and it has also permitted the CalSTRS board consultants to weigh in. Sunshine is a great disinfectant. This vaporware needs much work before it is ready to be approved, even in concept. Direct the staff to continue to explore and develop this plan. And I would point out that changing plans as you develop is okay, but you should be able to say, this is the change we are making, and this is what we learned that led to that change, rather than just announce it, that things are different without it ever pointing out to the change being made. I urge you to direct staff to continue to explore, but I would not approve vaporware in concept. Thank you.
Mr. Darby.
Mr. Chair, board members, Al Darby, President, Retired Public Employees Association. RPEA continues to oppose the two now known as managing members approach. In recent forums, the narrative by proponents of CalPERS Direct has changed to, we need to do something more in private equity, and pillars 3 and 4 are the best method to accomplish the new private equity objectives. However, the investment staff is still uncertain about whether the proposed semi-autonomous general partner structure is the right approach. Although the research and the experts are said to support this approach, and in other pension funds are said to be adopting it, there seems to be no documentation in verifying these claims. We do know that the entire Ontario teachers have successfully done this work in-house for 10 years. There's no explanation why it can't be done here, except that I'm told that the laws in California or the laws in Canada permit it to a greater degree than it would here. But there's nothing specifically stated about that. It would be prudent for CalPERS to adopt the Ontario teachers' approach and thereby avoiding entanglements with independent outside entities that CalPERS may not always agree with. Outside non-public financial entities sometimes look for cozy relationships that provide kickbacks and other perks to the principals. We know that CalPERS members would not want their trust fund to be involved in any such schemes. In view of this, an in-house approach to CalPERS would be a more prudent course in the beginning, rather than as a secondary approach, which seems to be what's being proposed. And with a new manager in private equity, which has been missing here for 2 years, it might be possible to bring this off. The argument that CalPERS can't find competent private equity experts is debunked by the claim that CalPERS staff says they can find general partner private equity experts. If they can find them, they ought to be able to find secondary private equity experts out there in the world. Finding private equity acquisition experts should be easier, since they're going to be doing a Warren Buffett type approach to the acquisitions, which is much kinder and gentler, and it would be easier to accomplish. The claim that some companies do not want to be bought by public pension funds due to transparency concerns is dubious. The right price is the most important factor. I just spoke to someone who was acquired by Genstar, and he said that he turned down an offer from a company he preferred to be bought by to take the money, the more money that the less desirable PE firm offered. So price is the most important factor. Moreover, most companies would welcome CalPERS' commitment to support healthy company growth instead of stripping its assets, leveraging it, cutting staff, managed bankruptcies, and whatever else traditional PE does. I spoke with the ex-head of the Texas Teachers Retirement System, and he debunked this system as well. we urge you not to go forward with this style of in pillars 3 and 4. Go in-house first. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Darby. Mr. Soares.
Thank you very much. My name is David Soares. I'm a licensed attorney. I'm retired after 32 years as a prosecutor in Santa Clara County. And first of all, I would like to incorporate my letter dated March 14th, which I sent via email, in which some of you have acknowledged by reply email, and I really appreciate that very much, reminding you of your obligations as the sole fiduciaries for the CalPERS Fund. I'm very concerned about this motion today, which seems to be a motion to do nothing. Mr. Meng, I've been following the last 18 months, the development of this, what started out as CalPERS Direct and is now Pillars 3 and 4, and I was gratified to hear Mr. Meng this morning because he appears to have walked back everything that I have heard for the last 18 months. And Mr. Fechner's motion seems to be almost a non-motion about this concept. Keep doing what you've been doing for the last 18 months and get back to us. Why do we need a motion for that? I'm very concerned that for some reason there's some face saving that's going to happen. I think that Mr. Meng is clearly walking this back because he realizes that what's been done so far doesn't make sense. And I completely agree with his conclusion that the most important things are the implementation details and the governance structure, which we basically have heard nothing about in the PowerPoints that have been presented to the board over the last 18 months. The concern is that we signal the markets that we're serious about this project. Well, as I suggest in my letter, the most important signal that we can send to the markets is filling a permanent managing director for private equity, a position that has been vacant for 2 years next month since Mr. DesRochers left CalPERS. That is what will signal the markets that we're serious, and when the board should start taking action, such as passing a motion to pursue this concept. That being said, something happened this morning that made what little hair I have left stand on end. And that is Mr. Jones said that there's going to be further discussion in closed session. And Ms. Brown asked Mr. Meng, are we talking about investment today? And Mr. Meng said, no. And I'd just like to remind this board that under the Bagley-Keene open meeting law, the exception under Government Code Section 11126, Subdivision C, Subdivision 15, allows closed session by pension boards about investment decisions. It does not provide an exception for discussion about creating governance structures. These are matters which are of public concern and must be discussed in public session. And in fact, Government Code Section 11130.7 makes it a crime for a board member to discuss in closed session a matter which that board member reasonably believes should be open to the public. And I'm flabbergasted that this board is discussing these governance issues, which are very important and matters of public concern, in closed session. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to address you this morning.
Just one clarification, Mr. Soares. The question was asked, are we in this session discussing specific investment? And so the answer was in relationship to this open session, not to what may be discussed in closed session.
And what I'm saying is at this meeting of the board, open or closed session, if you're discussing in closed session matters that are governance structure and not investment, there's a problem.
We understand, Mr. Soares, and we have counsel to advise us on this. So thank you very much. Appreciate your comment.
Good luck with that.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I would like to.
No, you've
I would
had
like
your
to
public
request a copy of the Makita letter.
The Makita letter is public information, I believe. It was distributed to the committee in open session.
Yeah, I would just
So
like
if it's
a
not in the
copy.
back, we'll make sure to get it in the back.
Okay,
Okay.
I'd just like a copy.
All right.
Thank you.
Next speakers, Mr. Woodson, Mr. Ingram, and Mr. Hutchings.
Could I defer to Ms. Hughes on behalf of First so I can follow her?
Ms. Hugh, yeah, that's fine. Would you come up first? Followed by Mr. Woodson and followed by Mr. Ingram.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay? Ms. Hugh.
Thank you. My name's Stephanie Hugh, California State Retirees. I'm speaking on behalf of Tim Behrens, the president.
Just a moment, ma'am. I want to make
Yes.
sure the clock is set.
Oh, I don't care about no clocks.
Well, we do. We do. So it's okay. Thank you. Now you may proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me today, or allowing me to speak. My comments today are directed to the recommendations of staff for this committee to approve the concept of Pillars 3 and 4 in the PE business model. As you know, CSR has not yet taken a pro or con position, but has raised many concerns before this committee and with staff regarding various aspects of this plan. We have expressed concerns regarding the lack of transparency to members of the two general partners. God bless you, whoever that was. Anyway, and our funded pension assets. We have received no assurances that the startup and annual expenses associated with creating these private companies would be less than the current 2 plus 20% expenses paid under the current PE model. We've been told the contracts with these two companies would be non-disclosable under the Public Records Act. We also have concerns with the governance model, which places huge authority in the two CEOs for these companies, including selecting all their own advisory board members. Not reportable to us. We have continued to ask questions of staff to better understand this model, and since we fully support the goal of increasing our funded status by increasing our returns, we still have concerns. We have heard that it is important for the board to send a signal to the market that it wants to pursue this model so that they can retain the interest of potential top-tier candidates. But we don't believe it's prudent for the board to approve a concept for which so many execution milestones remain uncertain. I don't recall this board ever being asked to approve a concept, or this committee, especially one which has been projected to invest $20 billion of our assets with so many unanswered questions. It's customary with uncertainty for staff to design pilot projects on a smaller scale with verifiable outcomes before proceeding to the large-scale implementation. We now have 4 very new board members who have had limited, and in one case, almost no time to become familiar with not just this plan, but all the many responsibilities they have assumed. We don't believe it possible for them to carry out their due diligence and fiduciary duty on our behalf on this plan, and therefore request reasonable time for them to get fully up to speed and request you delay a vote or vote no on the approval of this concept today. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Woodson.
Good morning. Larry Woodson, California State Retirees. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to comment. Also, thanks to Mr. Meng for answering our stakeholder questions. We submitted those last week, and we were told we would have answers Friday. We got them today, and so we're having to digest them on the spot, but I do have a response to a couple of their answers. One, on transparency. CSR has always understood that 3 and 4 investments and returns would be as publicly available as the current model. That hasn't been our issue, and as Ms. Hugh pointed out, it is that these contracts will essentially be secret. The expenses to fund these 2 private entities will not be disclosable, and we've heard estimates of up to $100 million annually. So it's impossible for us to know if there's savings over the 2+20 model. Also on the valuation issue and the validity, the answer this morning was that sales of private equity were very profitable, but that really kind of redefines the whole valuation reporting, because the vast majority of funds, the vast majority of investments are illiquid, and they are self-valued by the PE managers, so it's not just the sales. Then moving to CalPERS report as of June 30th, 2018 shows that CalPERS 10-year return is at 9%. So, it depends on how you slice it. I heard the high one, but over the last 10 years, it's been 9%. And of course, 9% sounds decent, but if you do question the validity of the valuations, then it is questionable. I found several studies that suggest investors are not getting true valuation from the firms they invest in. One Stanford study showed almost half of the 113 of the largest PE firms had overvalued their returns, and 13 of them by 100%. These are billion-dollar firms and the kind that CalPERS is consulting with and would be turning to for staffing. Valuation may be unreliable due to the fact that PE firms self-report, and there are no regulatory or professional uniform standards for reporting. So these managers are collecting 2% management fees based on their self-reported valuation. Finally, we've heard and we know PE has higher risk. There's another risk to this plan which can't be quantified, and that's risk associated with the governance model itself and the hiring of just 2 managers to invest up to $20 billion of our assets. First, diversification in firms and the number of firms lowers risk. Putting $20 billion into 2 firms raises it. And there is the risk of hiring someone with high skills but low ethical standards, and unfortunately there's no reliable method screening for that, as you know. Too many examples in the PE and hedge fund markets of unethical and illegal behavior, and I'll just end by pointing out that Bill McGlashan, who's the founder and managing partner of TPG, major PE firm which CalPERS has over $1 billion invested, was indicted for $250,000 bribes to get his son into USC. He's been terminated, but he and his top managers self-report TPG value to CalPERS. So in conclusion, please consider voting against this.
All right. Thank you. I would ask the staff not to automatically turn off the microphones.
Thank you.
Okay. Allow people to finish their comments. So I apologize, Mr. Woodson. Mr. Ingram, Mr. Hutchings, and Ms. Milstein. Mr. Ingram.
Thank you. I'm Reuben Ingram, the Executive Director of School Employers Association of California. We represent school districts and superintendents. We are here to urge you to adopt the recommendation from your staff. I know that there were some discussions earlier about what a board's role is, and there were talks about being visionary, and that's what we believe this requires, is a vision and looking to the future. I had a plan today to have Brett McFadden, the superintendent from Nevada Joint Union High School District here, but he had a family emergency. But he did send me his story, and that's what we wanted to share with you, because as you know, as employers, we're concerned about the return, we're concerned about our contribution rates. And so I do have his story, and I'm going to share it with you today. In the last 3 years, from 2014-15 to 2017-2018, his district has had a 16% increase in contribution rates for CalPERS. For 2018-2019, he's projecting a 27% increase. and his 5-year projection is an increase of 47%. And so I think you can see that his district and all of our districts need your help to look forward and find ways to mitigate these increases, and I know you know that those things are happening. So with that, I would just say we support the recommendation. We look forward to how this plan will develop, and we hope it will help us because we really need your help. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hutchings.
Good morning, Chair members. Dane Hutchings with the League of California Cities, here in strong support of staff's recommendation to approve this in concept. I think it's important to realize that over the past 18 months there have been diligent discussions, and this is yet just another step in exploring perhaps going into a new route to try and maximize returns. You know, and quite frankly, I want to thank the board for their, continuing to ask these right questions. You guys are asking the right questions and really showing your due diligence. And I think a healthy amount of skepticism is a good thing. It shows that you're taking your fiduciary responsibility seriously. It shows that you're not looking out just for the employer, the employee, or the retiree, but the whole system. And so I do want to thank you for that. But I will say I think that Board Member Hollinger hit it on the head with regards to taking, having to look at what the future holds. What is working right, or what is happening right now is not working, and you got to think outside of the box. So I continue to sort of share these numbers with you just to sort of remind you the difference, really, perhaps where cities are compared to where perhaps the state is from a financial position. So assuming we hit 7%, which Wilshire has already said that over the next 10 years is probably not going to happen. We're thinking closer to 6.2%. But assume for a moment we're going to hit 7% over the next 10 years. We are going to have over a doubling of our contribution rates for cities. We're going to have 10% of our cities spending anywhere from 18 to 21% or more of their entire general fund budget, not including healthcare, not including salary, nothing. That is the minimum contribution to pay for CalPERS. And to put that in perspective, that's about 50 cities. And that's, again, assuming they hit the 7% rate. When you factor in the shortening of the amortization schedule and with the discount rate reduction, fiscal year 24-25, that's when things are really going to get real scary for our city governments trying to provide services in the future. One of the things that our association likes about the PE model is that it is going to really maximize the most profitable asset allocation within the portfolio. I mean, we've seen what private equity has done over the past 20 years, particularly in fiscal years 17 and 18. We are not asking this board to do anything that is erroneous. You guys are taking your time. You're doing your due diligence. We would hope that you continue to do that. With me today, I have Lainey Milstein, the Assistant City Manager for the City of Sacramento, to share her story, and I will succeed my time to her. Thank you very much.
Ms. Milstein.
Good morning, Lainey Milstein. I'm Assistant City Manager of the City of Sacramento. As you're aware and you've heard here this morning, pension contributions for public agencies continue to increase significantly across California, and Sacramento is not immune to these rising costs. With our pension costs doubling over the next 5 years, and I'll put that in perspective, 100% cost increase from an estimated $67 million we'll be spending this year to over $125 million in 5 years. That's 10% of our general fund, and our revenues are not growing at that rate. As such, the City of Sacramento supports new and innovative tools that will provide strong returns for employers, employees, and our retirees who are depending on the sustainability of the pension fund. Over the last 20 years, private equity has exceeded an average of 10%, and it's critical that CalPERS remain vigilant in seeking ways to maximize investment returns. CalPERS' proposed private equity model appears to be an opportunity to allow the fund to recruit the industry's best investment professionals focused on maximizing returns. And I hope that the committee and the board will support continued consideration of this new model. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Mr. Gibbons and Mr. Neal.
Chair, members of the committee, Dylan Gibbons with the California Special Districts Association, here in strong support of the staff proposal for pillars 3 and 4 with regard to the private equity models. We're excited to see the efforts of staff and the direction that the board has given the staff to try and maximize the investments of the fund. For the last several years, we've been coming and testifying to the board, asking for assistance while supporting efforts of the reduction of the discount rate, because it was the prudent, responsible thing to do, the shortening of the amortization period, but also saying, look, we keep paying more money. What can you do to help us? And this is something I think monumental for CalPERS to do, in an effort to assist public agencies and employers and employees. For those reasons, we support the private equity model and encourage the board to continue down this path, taking a proactive approach to try and maximize fund returns.
Thank you. Mr. Neal.
Yes, Jeff Neal with the California State Association of Counties. I'm going to associate myself with the comments of Mr. Gibbons and Mr. Hutchins. In the same way as special districts and cities, counties have been struggling with increased costs for their public pensions. Many of them, though not all of them, invest with CalPERS and have seen increasing contribution rates. Really strongly support this proposal to try to increase the returns. Appreciate the attempt to do something that's a little bit different for this board, although, as was pointed out earlier, this is something that is being done at many institutions across the country and across the world. It's unexceptional in that regard, and we think makes sense for this board to pursue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank all of the people who've come to address us today on this topic. You know, we've talked about this concept for these private equity models for over 18 months, and the foundation of our discussion has been our shared goal, which is to earn a 7% return to help pay the benefits that have been promised to our members. And that continues to remain our primary focus, and private equity is one tool we have to achieve it. I want to thank the staff for the work to date. I know that there's a tremendous amount of work going forward, and that hopefully we are going to take a team approach to this, with us being responsible for oversight and meeting our fiduciary duty, while at the same time your role is to present to us a plan that can accommodate the increased returns and meet the objectives that we have in the private equity space. So I don't have any further requests to speak, and I think I did hear a request for a roll call vote on this one from someone, as I recall. So, all right, so we will, the motion's been made and seconded. Actually, it's an electronic vote, and you'll see it coming up on the screen. Okay. Committee members, please vote. All right, the motion passes. Thank you very much. We'll now move to item number 9A, Sustainable Investment Update.
Yes. Now, please, the team member from Sustainable Investment, please come up.
Good Good morning. Beth Richtman, Sustainable Investments Program. I'm here today to give you an update on our sustainable investments activities in 2018. With me are two colleagues of mine from the Sustainable Investment team, Divya Mankikar and Carrie Douglas Fong, who will respectively cover our approach to climate change and also our recent research on economic inequality. A lot happened in 2018. We're halfway through our 5-year Total Fund Strategic Plan, and I'm pleased to report that as a whole, we are on track for delivering the objectives approved by the board in 2016. All the information about the plan's initiatives, timeline, and progress, as well as specifics about the initiatives, are included in your appendix. A lot of great work and collaboration throughout the investment office has driven our results to date. Also, I want to mention how important our external partners have been from organizations such as Ceres, PRI, SASB, ICGN, and CII, which are critical to the work we're doing. Also, I'd like to highlight a few initiatives in the strategic plan in terms of progress. First, I'll mention Climate Action 100+. Climate Action 100+ has grown into a global engagement initiative, which now has over 300 investors representing more than $32 trillion behind it, and they're collectively engaging 161 companies across the world. It's really come a long way, especially in the past year, and we're excited about where it's going, which Samiso and Zima will talk about in the subsequent item on corporate governance. Next, I want to note that staff conducted research on water scarcity in 2018. A multi-asset class team analyzed water scarcity at the total fund level, and as a result, for the first time, the investment office has insights into which industries and asset classes in our portfolio are most exposed to water scarcity risk. In the strategic plan, it mentions in 2019 that a sustainable investments report will be issued. I want to note that we are actually working to overhaul our website as a way to provide updates on the work we're doing on a more ongoing basis. So mostly we are on target for the strategic plan, but I do want to flag a few challenges. The strategic plan asks staff to report on the carbon footprinting of our private equity portfolio in 2020. Basically, a carbon footprint is a snapshot of the carbon emissions of an investment portfolio at a period of time. Usually, it's looked at over the course of a year. Though we remain on track for delivering a carbon footprints for most of our asset classes, carbon emissions data just isn't available for the vast majority of our private equity portfolio, and we'd prefer to extend the deadline to try to get better data rather than to report a very rough estimate next year. Second, ESG integration is listed as a challenge, but that's not at all because work isn't happening or progress isn't being made. Rather, it's a journey we're on, and it's a work in progress. ESG integration for us is mainly about focusing on sustainable investment topics that can affect our risk and return. Industry tools and data remain in early stages, but are maturing, and there's growing acceptance of the importance of ESG topic analysis to finance professionals in terms of making investment decisions. Related to that, I did want to just take a brief minute and point out a recent position statement that came out from the CFA Institute, which is the Organization of Chartered Financial Analysts. They said, more thorough consideration of ESG factors by financial professionals can improve the fundamental analysis they undertake and ultimately the investment choices they make. Further, the CFA Institute encourages all investment professionals to consider ESG factors where relevant as an important part of the analytical and investment decision-making process, regardless of investment style, asset class, or investment approach. Staff has been spending a lot of time exploring new tools and working on the strategic plan initiative on data and corporate reporting in order to usher in an era where we have improved ESG data and information to help us and the market better price related risks and opportunities. That said, integration requires different tools and approaches for our different asset classes and styles of investment. To illustrate this point, I'll use real assets and global equity. In our real assets program, individual large assets are being carefully underwritten, and frequently sustainable investment staff is pulled in to consult with the real assets team and their managers to help analyze particular ESG topics that can affect the returns. That type of fundamental underwriting of individual assets and real assets is simply different from how investment decision-making works in our global equity portfolio, which has more than 10,000 stocks and is the largest part of CalPERS' portfolio. Rather than a review of each stock, securities come in and out of our internally managed global equity portfolio, mainly through a systematic and quantitative process. So therefore, ESG integration means very different things for those two very different styles of investment decision making. There's also the consideration of how our benchmarks are designed and whether they align well with ESG-informed decision-making and CalPERS' longer-term horizon. A lot to think about, but progress is being made in thinking about these challenges. So looking beyond the strategic plan, there are a few new and substantial pieces of work I wanted to bring to your attention. First, I'll note that in 2018, the financial markets team and their work stream became part of the Sustainable Investments Program. Two main areas of focus for our financial markets team are data and corporate reporting, very much in line with our strategic plan, and also market structure. For market structure, the team works to address marketplace conflicts of interest and inefficiencies, with the goal of reducing transaction costs and improving our performance. Second, in 2018, CalPERS, led by our CEO, helped found the Investor Leadership Network. This organization organizes initiatives for leading investors interested in addressing sustainability and long-term growth. One of the initiatives focuses on climate risk reporting, which is very timely given the new requirements of Senate Bill 964 that was passed last year, which are described in the appendix. Climate change is a big topic for us as investors, given the multiple risks and opportunities which accompany the unprecedented changes to the economy and physical world expected from the various facets of climate change. We are currently at a 1 degree Celsius temperature rise globally, and the world and the economy are already seeing impacts. In 2017 and 2018, there were over $500 billion of economic losses from natural disasters. Munich Re, the world's largest global reinsurer, pointed to climate change as a key driver. Yet, with global policies and practices, the temperature is set to rise an additional 2 to 3 degrees by the end of the century. With that rise, there is expected to be increasingly extreme and volatile weather and changes to the ecosystems that support so much of our business activity in our portfolio. These changes are unprecedented in human history, let alone since the development of financial markets. We're tackling this very big topic in two ways. One, we're working to mitigate the absolute risk of climate change through emissions reductions, and also working to inform our investment decisions. For us, climate change is a systemic problem that requires systemic tools like carbon pricing to address. Divya Mankikar will now walk us through the set of related and reinforcing activities we're working on around climate change.
Thank you, Beth. Divya Mankikar, Investment Manager with Sustainable Investment. So on slide 3, you have our overall approach, and I'll just give you a little bit more detail on a couple of the bullet points here. So broadly speaking, we are looking at research and integration, advocacy, and engagement-related activities. On research and integration, the SI program is working to pilot and procure tools that can help our asset classes leverage climate science to inform relevant investment decisions. Though climate science is very mature, translating climate science in a manner that can inform investment decisions is an emerging tactic. You may have seen in September that we announced leveraging a new partnership between Wellington Asset Management and Woods Hole Research Center, where we will be piloting insights from their research collaboration. Wellington Asset Management is one of the world's largest asset managers, and Woods Hole is a world-class climate research institution whose current president was a senior advisor to the previous administration's National Science and Technology Council. So we'll be working with them to distill their research on the physical impacts of climate change mapped at a global level into actionable investment insights that are useful to our decision process. The last point on integration, we look forward to collaborating with the asset classes and Invo leadership to identify economically attractive opportunities that enhance returns and reduce emissions. The next subheading there is advocacy. On advocacy, we'll continue analyzing and commenting on relevant regulation. For example, this past year, we submitted written comments to the EPA on environmental policy changes. For over a decade, CalPERS has repeatedly weighed in on domestic and international policy in support of greater disclosure from companies on climate-related risks, reduced fossil fuel subsidies, and regulation that prices carbon emissions. A meaningful price creates an economic a meaningful carbon price creates an economic signal to companies that their customers that can incentivize lower carbon choices, and we feel carbon pricing is an investor-aligned approach. In aggregate, these lower carbon choices can help get us on track to a thriving low-carbon economy. So as part of our annual principles review at a later date, we'll be proposing updating our governance and sustainability principles with the language on slide 4. To bring our principles in line with our long-standing support for such policy. We anticipate leveraging collaboration with our strategic partners that Beth mentioned earlier, as we think setting a meaningful price on carbon is key to getting our economy on track for a temperature rise limited to 1.5 degrees, and that this would shield our portfolio from the worst effects of climate change. Finally, back on slide 3, the subheading on engagement. We continue to support CalPERS' work on Climate Action 100+ through collaborating with corporate governance on engaging major emitters. Further detail on those engagements will be provided by corporate governance shortly. And SI also helps to coordinate and provide leadership to Climate Action 100+ through contributing to the steering committee and the global working groups. In addition, we've begun engaging companies dependent on agriculture through their direct emissions or through dependence on the sector in their supply chains. Particularly, we've begun working on deforestation and land use change because cultivation of soy, palm oil, timber, and cattle is one of the largest causes of carbon emissions. Protecting forests is important for slowing climate change because of the forest's ability to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and ultimately store carbon. Finally, this year we're working on a report on climate-related financial risk under the purview of SB 964. This California legislation requires that CalPERS report on climate-related financial risks to our portfolio by January 1st, 2020. We're hopeful that the process of doing the substantial work for our climate risk reporting will be useful in helping our investment office and board better understand the climate risks that we face as investors. And with that, I'll turn to Carrie Douglas Fong to take you through our approach on economic inequality.
Thank you, Divya. Carrie Douglas Fong, Sustainable Investments. First, background on why we're presenting a report on economic inequality. Noting increased economic inequality, investment committee members requested staff research the issue and bring back an update to the committee. Today, we're providing that update. The research we present builds upon prior work on the Sustainable Investment Research Initiative, or SIRI. If you look to page 13 of your presentation, there's information on this as well. Performed by Columbia Law School, UC Davis Graduate School of Management, and investment office staff. SIRI included a review of over 1,800 academic papers and 2 symposiums at UC Davis. The 27th symposium focused on areas of human capital, including inequality. Results of the SIRI review of academic papers were inconclusive and did not identify actionable solutions for an investor. In 2008, staff initiated a second research project in response to investment committee's request. Research focused on economic inequality, which is the extent to which both income and wealth is distributed unevenly among a population. Our research involved review of industry reports, reading relevant literature, and speaking with experts and other investors. Some of the most valuable information came from the investment office economists who compiled economic data and reports that addressed inequality. Throughout our research, we focused on what was most relevant to an investor. Our findings. Some research was conflicting and not actionable for an investor. That said, the data did provide us with the following observations. Economic inequality has increased in the United States dramatically since the 1970s. The 2008 global financial crisis exacerbated existing inequality in the United States. Inequality seems well linked to geopolitical risk. It's hard not to find historical and current examples to support this. The fall of the Roman Empire, French Revolution, and events leading to World War II all illustrate how economic inequality increases geopolitical risk. Today, we see a worldwide pattern of increased expression of populist views that appear driven, at least in part, by concerns over increased inequality. These include the Yellow Vest movement, Brexit, and current national debate on inequality and policy in the United States. Notably, in all cases, worker frustration with economic inequality is an important factor. Given the geopolitical risk, staff compiled a list of next steps found on page 5 of our PowerPoint. There are several we would like to conclude with. We can achieve strong investment returns, refine and further establish human capital management metrics, and finally, continue our financial markets work, which looks to promote healthy markets and address systemic risk and prevent another 2008 financial market collapse. Back to Beth.
Thank you, Carrie and Divya. We look forward to continuing
Microphone.
Thank you, Carrie and Divya. We look forward to continuing our progress on all these investment topics and efforts, and we are happy to take any questions you have or feedback. Additionally, Wilshire, the board consultant, did submit a letter and is available for questions after our Q&A as well.
Yeah. Why don't we have Wilshire make a comment on this now, and then we do have board members who have questions.
Sorry, thank you. Happy to. Daniel Ingram from Wilshire Consulting. Thank you very much. Just a quick update on the Sustainable Investment Team that we've included a letter in your packet. Here we thought it would be helpful just to give a quick update given some of the team changes and some of the new board members. A quick note on process. We went to host a series of meetings with different members of the Sustainable Investment Team with Ms. Rittman and some of her direct reports, and reviewed some of their materials and outputs over the course of the past 12 months. The letter that we showed you, just really 2 points to make. One is around the change in structure. Clearly, in the past 12 months, the appointment of a managing investment director in Ms. Rickman has been a big change to the Sustainable Investment Program. The team will be up to its full complement of 14 staff, probably in the next few months. The team structure has changed with the bringing in of financial markets and responsible contracting. In addition to the change in structure, there's also been a change in approach that would like to highlight this change in approach as a positive, to move away from what can be quite a sort of clunky, potentially siloed approach to project-based outputs. The team is now clearly moving to much more of a strategic approach, trying to join up the dots to help better inform investment decisions across the investment office. And our opinion is that there is an emerging collaborative team culture. There is evidence of increased curiosity amongst the investment team around the materiality of environmental, social, and governance risks and opportunities, and the team's work is consistent with CalPERS investment beliefs. Thank you.
Okay. Controller Yee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the report. I had a couple questions. Could you elaborate a little bit more about the challenge with the carbon footprint of private equity? And do you think you'll have enough information to meet the new schedule?
Sure. So in researching how we would potentially approach a carbon footprint in private equity, we've looked at examples that exist in the marketplace, and there are really just a handful. When you compare that to other asset classes, there are dozens of examples and a cottage industry of experts willing to help us sort through reported data, different methodologies for estimating and for then aggregating the footprint at the total portfolio level. CDP, formerly known as Carbon Disclosure Project, which is the main original source for such data, has been, developing an approach to looking at private company disclosure, but still their data set of disclosed company information pales in comparison to the publicly listed asset classes. So really, where we would look is to support greater disclosure from private companies, which we can then ultimately aggregate into a portfolio carbon footprint.
I see. Okay. And then, and first of all, thank you for, when we set out with our ESG strategic plan, seemed like all the pieces were quite daunting, but it's just really is beautifully kind of coming together in terms of the integration of some of the pieces. But there's still challenges in terms of fully integrating the investment office. And I guess, can you just describe kind of the ongoing plans in terms of fully integrating ESG into our investment decisions?
So, as I noted in my comments earlier, Beth Richtman, CalPERS staff, there is a lot of progress being made, and I would say that different asset classes are at different places in their journeys. I think, some of the tools that have been emerging have proved very useful. For instance, for real assets, they have the GRESB tool and an ESG consideration matrix. Fixed income has developed a lot of processes for how they are analyzing and tracking their analysis of ESG risks and opportunities when they do review corporate bonds. But there still remains I guess lack of standardization for reporting for our publicly traded companies, and that is an area where CalPERS is very much focusing. And we have been working closely with SASB, which is the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board. Both Dan Bienvenu and I, he's the head of our global equity program, both sit on the SASB Investor Advisory group. And we see that as working to push forward standards on a global basis. We also have numerous positions on various financial markets and data and corporate reporting related entities and engagements in progress globally to try to improve the standards for what's getting reported. And that, once we have that, once we have really high quality standards and greater transparency about the ESG risks and opportunities, it's easier to integrate into your investment decision making. Yeah. But also, as mentioned, we do have very different investment decision making processes in our different asset classes, which affects what can be done.
Right, okay. You talking about the strategies for addressing income inequality, and wanted to see if you could give us a little bit more flavor about the two ESG-themed strategies that addresses income inequality that CalPERS has invested in, the $2 billion.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I'm not quite sure.
I think it was slide 12.
Slide 12.
About the ESG-themed strategies addressing income inequality. Can you just describe those a little bit?
Oh, so this was about, so on slide 12, we described the research we completed on water risk and economic inequality. Separately, it discusses that there were, Global Equity did conduct some research on ESG strategies for global equity that weren't focused on economic inequality, but were focused on using ESG factors as a way to actually drive alpha in their portfolio, and they did invest in two strategies.
Okay. And then with respect to advocacy, I guess where is the SEC now with respect to just trying to help facilitate corporate response to either TCFD or SASB reporting?
So I would say it's a work in progress. There is progress being made in for instance, CalPERS did support a human capital petition, and And that we're hoping that will be further discussed in the coming year related to that topic. Recently, actually, I think several members of the Sustainable Investment Team, but also I believe Dan were in Washington D.C. about a week ago, and they met with Chair Clayton to talk about where the SEC is. And one piece of feedback I got from that meeting, and I'd let Dan or Don Ponce from our financial markets team chime in if they'd like, is that there is the question of what ESG means to different investors, because there is some confusion in the marketplace about what ESG means to various people. I think it is interesting when I meet either stakeholders or even new board members. Sometimes ESG, how it's reported in the press, it makes it sound like it's about divestment or about one particular aspect of ESG, rather than it being about looking at what are the material, environmental, social, governance topics that could be relevant to a particular industry or a particular investment decision making. So I'd say it's still a journey. I think that they are still looking for clarity from investors, and that's one of the reasons we're very supportive of the approach that SASB is taking and working with SASB to even improve what they have and build upon it, just because it's very focused on materiality and focus on industry by industry issues.
Okay, great. And then I was unclear about the Investor Leadership Network in terms of the goal of the network and implementing the TCFD disclosures. How does that relate or sync up with the Climate Action 100 plus engagements? Sure.
So it is a little separate. So Climate Action 100 is focusing on the companies disclosing according to TCFD. The Investor Leadership Network is focused on how investors like CalPERS and the other funds involved can disclose. Okay. Now, they are related in that in order for us to analyze the risk to our portfolios posed by the various aspects of climate change, for instance, transition risk or physical risk, we do actually need better reporting from our underlying companies. So that's where the Climate Action 100 push on getting companies disclosed does help that.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anne Simpson, CalPERS team member. I just wanted to add a little bit more detail in response to the question about the SEC. As you know, CalPERS sits on the Investor Advisory Committee, which had a hearing on ESG reporting towards the end of last year, which I think did a great deal to start mapping out, as Beth says, bring some clarity to really what we mean by environmental, social, and governance issues and how they become relevant for investors. The next meeting of the Investor Advisory Committee, we're expecting to make a recommendation that the SEC pick up rulemaking on human capital management. And this is an issue which CalPERS was very actively involved in supporting a petition to the SEC a couple of years ago, but it looks as though we're on the brink now of having that recommendation, and then we'll obviously be in a position to look at the SEC's response to that. So really, I think some very good progress.
Okay, good. That's good to hear. And then one last question, if I may, and this may relate to the next item as well, but there's been a lot in the news about expected IPOs for Uber, Lyft, and a number of other companies. And just curious if you've heard anything about whether they plan to issue shares with full voting rights, or are we... That's what our principles call for, but I'm
bringing up Don Ponce, who works as part of the Sustainable Investment Team on our financial markets work.
Okay.
Great. Good morning. Don Ponce, Investment Director, Sustainable Investments. So we've had capital formation brought up a couple of times today, so certainly a very important topic. The structure of IPOs, obviously we've had, CalPERS has been very active with regard to our concerns over dual class structures, our concerns in particular over no vote structures. And we are continuing to advocate in that space. However, really highlighting the comment from earlier from Ms. Hollinger with regard to the shrinking number of public companies, we do need to be aware that we may we may want to, as a group of asset owners, as long-term investors, seek a more amenable solution in trying to encourage these small upstart companies to utilize public capital formation. But at the same time, obviously our priority is ultimately working towards one share, one vote, maintaining sufficient investor protections and transparency. And so it's an ongoing effort both with our peers, our asset owner peers, a number of industry groups, CII being predominant, ICGN as well. And you've seen a number of solutions that have been put out that are attempting to maintain those protections while also promoting these companies to utilize public capital formation, sunset provisions being, I think, the most preeminent version of that. The idea for Lyft is that they will have, now I don't know if we've had updated information as of today, I'll be clear, but with regard to a dual class structure, we have not had, and anybody can jump in if they have specifics, but with regard to the pure no vote structure, which is our true concern, it has been quite some time, and I think the efforts from CII, from ourselves, from other asset owners and members of the pension community have been very active in identifying. And not to mention, you had a visit here, at least at the offsite, with Commissioner Jackson in January, who has been a strong advocate in our corner and in the corner of the industry of long-term investors with regard to really identifying the concerns. While we want to encourage these small companies to utilize public capital formation, ongoing perpetual control by insiders is certainly not in that best interest. And in fact, there's data that supports that right around that 6 to 7 year window is when those benefits potentially shift. So this is an ongoing effort. It's one that we're very active. I will say that the engagement with the Commission, both through Ann's membership in the IAC, has been critical, but also our ongoing meetings with the commissioners themselves, specifically Commissioner Jackson, but also Chair Clayton and others, have been very active in just making sure that our concerns are being heard in this space.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank you, Beth, for the really clear, concise report. And then kind of expanding on that report, I do appreciate it. I'm very happy to see our Climate Action 100. You guys have done an excellent job with that. It didn't start with that, as I recall. It started with, what was it, 80, 60, 80? So congratulations. This was a huge accomplishment with $32 trillion. I think that's amazing. I also wanted to ask about our income inequality, and you know that that's been an interest of mine, and I really appreciate, and I lost the page, where'd it go? On page 5, oops, was it page 5? One of the questions I think that I had was, maybe it wasn't page 5, hold on a second. There it is. Page 13, I'm sorry. You have economic inequalities on the observations to date on the far right-hand column. Economic inequalities' effect on growth is unclear. Economic gains may have shifted from labor to owners. I think we can cross out may. But I think one of the comments that I'd like to make, and then a question I'll follow up with, and we're going to have this later as a presentation, which is our say on pay, right? One of the reasons that I think that we're so active with say on pay and CEO pay is because it directly links to income inequality. And when CEOs are being paid 340 times what the average employee in the United States is being paid, that's a huge income inequality, wealth inequality problem. So it's important that we also draw, when you talked about the geopolitical risk, well, as an institution and in collaboration, I think it's important that we look at what that say on pay means. It means that those CEOs and those corporations have a say on our political system because they can buy that say. And that takes away from the tax base in our communities, cities, counties, and states, which thereby widens the gap of the wealth inequality, because they get to vote basically with their money, and we just saw it with a huge tax break that redistributes the wealth to the 1%, where the rest of us are just barely making it by. So I think, and I know we've got this 5-year strategy, so I'm not asking you guys to do this now, but I think something we need to consider if we are looking at income inequality and looking at some way to resolve these issues, we need to look at tax policy. So my question is there a way we can do that at a later date? I know we have our 5-year strategy set, but I think tax policy is very important when we're looking at wealth redistribution.
Well, two comments. One, I will say related to compensation. If you look at item 5 on page 5,
right?
Just to say that we are going to be coming back to the board as part of the total fund policy review with updated language on the compensation section of our principles to talk more holistically about corporations' compensation of their workforce and not just to focus on executive pay. That said, SMISO and the corporate governance team will be talking about our current activities related to proxy voting and corporate engagement about executive pay. On tax policy, that is a complex topic for CalPERS, and one where I think there would have to be substantial discussions before we weigh in on tax policy, given just our tax exempt status amongst other
Understandable, but I think that it's important that we at least take a look at it, do a little research on it. I'm not asking, I know our plates are full, I'm not asking for you guys to do that right now.
Yeah. The other thing I just will point out, that on this same slide, you can see that as, I guess the third bullet down, is that we are going to be reviewing and potentially commenting on policies that could exacerbate or decrease risk from economic inequality. So that is something that we will do as part of our review of policy on an ongoing basis.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Controller Yee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I neglected to ask. First, thank you for the proposed incorporation of the carbon pricing framework. And just want to get a sense of timing of when that may be before us to actually incorporate fully.
Thank you for the question. As acting COIO, one thing that we've talked about is kind of how and when we update our policies. If you'll recall from all of the asset classes, policies get looked at once per year with the program review. We've decided to migrate to that for the total fund. So we will do the total fund policy. Right now, that there hasn't been the history has been that the total fund policy has been opened far too frequently. We would like to move to a place where we open it once a year, just like the asset classes, do it in concurrent with the August total fund performance review, where staff takes the lead. So it would be a first read in August, second read in September, and we would move to that as an annual basis.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for the presentation. For the materials. We do have a lot of people who have signed up to speak on this particular item. So I have, I think, 19 people who've signed up, and so you can easily do the math at 3 minutes and figure out how long that's going to take. So I would ask if we can clear 5 seats here. I'm going to call people up 5 people at a time so we can be efficient in our time. You will have up to 3 minutes. I want to emphasize it's up to 3 minutes. You don't have to take all of your time. And I would ask you all to do the best job you can in not being repetitive of people who've made comments before. But if you have original thoughts, we'd certainly want to hear them. So the first 5 people, Deborah, and I apologize in advance if I mispronounce your name. So when you come up and start at the microphone, the timer will be set. You'll be able to see the clock below me. And, pardon me? Oh, well, the first 3 names are Deborah Sylvie, Deborah Hammond, Richard Godfrey, Patrice Sutton, and Robert Gould, MD. And so if you'll state your name and your affiliation, if any, and you'll have up to 3 minutes. And are you Miss Sylvie?
I am.
All right, very good.
So
All right, you may start.
Yes, thank you for allowing me to speak today. I am Deborah Sylvie. I'm president and board chair of Fossil Free California. And a little over 4 years ago, I helped launch Fossil Free California just outside this building with the mission of promoting a just transition to a low carbon economy by reducing financial support for fossil fuels. I'm also a CalPERS retiree, and I'm very grateful for this pension. I share your goal of ensuring that this fund continues to do well. But today I'm even more concerned about the risk fossil fuel investments pose to our retirement funds than I was 4 years ago. The current value of fossil fuel companies derives from their stated reserves, what still lies in the ground. But that value is on the decline, and it will continue to decline. These reserves are likely to become stranded assets sooner than we might have thought until recently. That's because there's growing awareness among financial and political leaders, apart from the U.S. administration, that we have to act now to keep temperatures from catastrophic increases. And a huge key to stopping temperature rise is to stop burning fossil fuels. The rapid growth of renewable technologies will decrease fossil fuels' value even more. If this decline is inevitable, how can it best be managed for our financial future? We believe now is the time for a managed decline in investment in fossil fuels. This means taking a considered look at the kinds of companies that present the greatest risk. Norway gives an important model for us. In its recent decision to divest $1 trillion of its wealth fund from oil and gas exploration companies, the objective, according to its finance minister, is, quotes, to reduce the vulnerability of our Commonwealth to a permanent oil price decline. Hence, he continues, it's more accurate to sell companies which explore and produce oil and gas rather than selling a broadly diversified energy sector. We believe CalPERS can follow that model. Rather than propping up companies that continue to ignore climate science and confuse the public, do something else. Like Norway, stop investing in companies that explore for needless new drilling sites. They're wasting their money and ours. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Hammond.
Hi, my name is Deborah Hammond, and I'm a CalPERS retiree from Sonoma State University. I'm also here in support of Fossil Free California, and I thank you for your efforts to integrate sustainability concerns in investment decisions, and I really appreciate the presentation from Beth Rickman and her staff. And also thank you for the opportunity to express my concerns regarding the investment of my pension funds in the fossil fuel industry. The environmental and ethical considerations are reason enough to begin to pull our funds out of fossil fuels, especially continued exploration. However, I think the financial arguments are even more compelling. I understand that CalPERS has lost approximately $16 billion over the past 10 years due to its investment in fossil fuels. Global indexes without fossil fuels are now outperforming those with fossil fuels. Over 1,000 institutions, including the World Bank and the country of Ireland, are in the process of divesting over $8 trillion in fossil fuel funds. Projections for future returns on fossil fuel investments assume that all fossil fuel reserves will be consumed, which is highly unrealistic given the growing political impetus for policies restricting carbon emissions. Demand for fossil fuels is already in decline. Renewable energy is already competitive economically and will only continue to be more so. According to Science Daily, continuing current levels of investment and production, despite declining demand, could trigger a carbon bubble, resulting in a global wealth loss of several $1 trillion, comparable to that which triggered the financial crisis in 2007. With its enormous financial resources, CalPERS could play a critical role in averting this disaster and helping to fund the transition to a clean energy economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, Richard Godfrey.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you. I'm going to, if I may, read one
paragraph from a letter from the mayor of Fremont, Lily May. I serve as the chair of the Environmental Sustainability Commission, and as you may know, and you've received this letter already, the city of Fremont did divest from all fossil fuels recently. The letter states, just this one paragraph, with alternative investment strategies and sustainable and reliable funds, CalPERS is already prepared to pursue a fossil fuel divestment position and strategy. The city of Fremont encourages your agency to continue seeking sustainable growth investments in robust and reliable funds so as to increase better yields while at the same time completely divesting your holdings from fossil fuels. On a more personal note, I would just like to say I've served as a surgical oncologist for 35 years, so I'm familiar with uncontrolled growth. But even more, all of you and many of you are parents, have children, and you know there's such a thing as a tipping point. And that's when a temperature of a child goes higher than 106 degrees, at which point they lose all capacity for further life-sustaining parts of their body. The same may be true on a planetary level, so I don't think I can emphasize enough the importance of your board and your decision making in terms of risking a tipping point with climate change. We look to your leadership, and we really thank you for your careful consideration on these decisions you're making today and in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sutton.
Good morning. My name is Patrice Sutton. I'm a public health professional who worked for 20 years at the California Department of Public Health, and for the past decade as a research scientist at UC San Francisco Program on Reproductive Health and the Environment. I've published extensively on how our environment impacts the health of workers, pregnant women, and children. I'm also a member of the San Francisco Bay Area chapter of Physicians for Social Responsibility, and on behalf of PSR, I'm asking CalPERS to divest from the fossil fuel industry to protect the health of California's workers, their families, their communities, and future generations. Our work at UCSF and the research of many other academic scientists demonstrate unequivocally that burning fossil fuels and its related climate impacts harms the health of the people you serve. To take just one impact, air pollution, the science shows that there is no safe level of exposure, and because of the way our lungs develop over time, exposure to air pollution among pregnant women and children can lead to a lifetime of adverse health problems. In California, our climate-fueled wildfires bring extraordinary air pollution threats, and when fires burn in developed areas, the toxics that permeate our everyday lives also goes up in smoke. And for older adults like CalPERS retirees, exposure leads to more hospitalizations for respiratory and cardiac conditions. Rising temperatures are a direct threat to California's agricultural workers, construction workers, emergency responders, commercial fishermen, paramedics, transportation workers, and many others who work outdoors. Exposure to excessive heat killed 783 U.S. workers and injured nearly 70,000 between 1992 and 2016. And for the general public, it's estimated that in the 2006 California heat wave alone led to an additional 600 deaths, 16,000 emergency room visits, and 1,100 hospitalizations in California at economic costs of $5.4 billion. Climate change also means injury and loss of life due to severe storms, flooding, vector and waterborne diseases, and stress and mental trauma from the loss of livelihoods, property, and displacement. The California coast extends 3,400 miles with 200,000 people living in areas at risk of inundation within the lifetime of my 8-year-old grandchild. So I ask you if there were a cost-effective medicine that your members could take so they might not die too young, get sick, be unable to go to work and school, would you really say let's ignore that medicine? The science is clear. Investing in the health of Californians means divesting from fossil fuels. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Dr. Gould.
Yeah. Good morning. I'm Dr. Robert Gould. Also want to thank you for the opportunity to speak here and for your work. After working as a pathologist for over 30 years at Kaiser, since 2012, I've been an associate adjunct professor, Department of OBGYN and Reproductive Sciences at UCSF School of Medicine, with our program on reproductive health and the environment. I'm speaking today as past president and member of the National Board of Physicians for Social Responsibility and for the San Francisco Bay Area chapter of PSR, for which I've been president for 30 years. Representing thousands of health professionals, we speak for the health of our patients and communities. As such, PSR calls for CalPERS to completely divest from fossil fuels and instead invest its vast financial holdings in truly safe, renewable, and sustainable non-nuclear energy portfolios that could provide a prosperous future for its clients while averting the most catastrophic public and environmental health consequences of global warming that, as many speakers have said, threaten all human civilization. The fourth National Climate Assessment warned us about the rapidly unfolding impacts of global warming that gravely threaten our health. Sea level rise with flooding and contamination of water systems, extreme weather events like last year's hurricanes that devastated Puerto Rico and Houston, horrific wildfires such as we've witnessed in California, the anticipated spread of new vectors and their infectious agents with potential epidemics. Consequently, many health organizations such as the American Medical Association, American Nurses Association, American Public Health Association have issued strong policy statements on global warming. These have been joined by resolutions from numerous health specialty societies, including the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Physicians, and many other members of the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health. While greening our own healthcare institutions, health providers are increasingly supporting divestment campaigns. In June 2018, the AMA Board of Trustees passed an official policy calling on the AMA to protect human health from the effects of climate change by ending its investments in fossil fuel companies. The AMA now supports efforts of physicians and other health professional associations to proceed with divestment, including to create public analyses, support continuing medical education, and to inform our patients, the public, legislators, and government policymakers. Recently, our UCSF division of the Academic Senate overwhelmingly passed a resolution urging the UC Board of Regents to divest from the 200 publicly traded fossil fuel companies with the greatest carbon reserves, with this resolution now moving to other UC campuses for consideration. My personal stake is I want my two grandsons to have a future to thrive in. So along with our community of physicians and health professionals, I urge CalPERS to speedily divest from fossil fuels, set an example for the rest of the world to ensure we all have a planet that will be healthful and habitable for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kuhl. The next 5 people to speak, Tina Devon Gallier, Robert Sylvie, Sandy Emerson, Betsy Thagard, and Sheila Thorne. Ms. Gallier?
Oh, hi.
Okay, great.
My name is Tina Devon Gallier. I am a member of Fossil Free California. I would like to thank the CalPERS board for what they have done on sustainability so far. CalPERS manages one of the largest pools of money in the world, and what you do matters. And right now, you have a chance to change history and help the world avoid the worst effects of climate change at 1.5 degrees Celsius, which the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has determined that we will experience in another 10 to 12 years unless greenhouse gas emissions are dramatically reduced now. So I ask you to please terminate your investments in fossil fuels as soon as possible, as well as investments in big banks such as Wells Fargo that finance fossil fuel infrastructure, and as well as carbon-intensive industries such as concrete. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sylvie.
Yes, hello. I'm Robert Sylvie, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. My wife, Deborah Sylvie, as she mentioned earlier, is a retired CalPERS member. It's very important to both of us that CalPERS invest its assets wisely and sustainably. We'd like to see that pension check keep coming, of course. I know that all of you on the CalPERS board share our focus on the fund's long-term solvency. as Fossil Free California has previously suggested, we believe that complete divestment from all fossil fuels would help achieve that goal of sustainability and of solvency. But I'd like to propose one specific interim step, a step which is actionable now. Stop investing in ExxonMobil and accelerate the process of divesting from the company. Exxon is a risky investment and an unreliable partner. As of December 31st, the CalPERS institutional portfolio has almost $800 million invested in Exxon. This has been a shockingly bad investment. Over the last 10 years, while the S&P 500 increased by 223%, ExxonMobil stock declined by more than 4.5%. And the prospects for future growth are equally dim. The peak of fossil fuel demand is expected sometime in the 2020s, perhaps within 5 years. Exxon will then find itself saddled with stranded assets in the form of reserves that cannot be extracted for the market price. Like coal stocks over the last few years, Exxon stock will then plummet even further. There's another reason to avoid Exxon. The company is an unreliable partner. For more than 50 years, its scientists have been aware of the dangers of climate change and the contribution of Exxon products to its acceleration. But until very recently, the company hid this information. Exxon could have told the truth about climate change and used its financial and political clout to begin the process of energy transition. Instead, it continues even now to explore for more oil and gas to add to its reserves. It also uses every stratagem to keep the internal climate risk calculations secret, even from its own shareholders. Climate change is coming quickly, and it will have enormous financial impacts. We no longer invest in livery stables or buggy whip manufacturers. We should no longer invest in Exxon. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Ms. Emerson.
I'm Sandy Emerson. I'm from Fossil Free California. I want to thank Beth Richtman and her staff for a thoughtful and comprehensive update on sustainable investments. It's notable that the Sustainable Investments Office will be spending considerable time and effort monitoring and measuring carbon-intensive investments to determine the size of the risk they represent to the portfolio. Decarbonizing the portfolio not only reduces this risk, but also reduces the effort needed to report on the behavior of major emitters, which is unlikely to change until the market moves out from under them. The value of fossil fuels sometime before 2035 will abruptly decline as investments in clean energy overtake the market, with or without government intervention. This capital loss, potentially between $1 and $4 trillion, will trigger worldwide economic chaos. By comparison, the market crash of 2008 was triggered by capital loss of only $250 billion. Recognizing this risk, over 1,000 institutional investors have pledged, worth over $8.2 trillion, have pledged to move their assets away from fossil fuels. Institutional investors, insurance companies, and even banks are betting on the clean energy economy. As you heard in February, there's considerable upside potential in clean energy investments, such as the renewable sector of infrastructure investments. You could be making billions of dollars more by divesting from fossil fuels. The time is now to join the growing number of institutional investors who are investing in the transition to the low-carbon economy. The socially responsible investing sector has grown by 38% in just the last 2 years as an investing style, to a total market size of over $12 trillion. CalPERS should not only measure the risk inherent in the traditional energy sector, but also actively move the fund forward by increasing its investments in the transition to the low-carbon economy.
Thank you very much. Ms. Thagard?
Hello, I'm Betsy Thagard. I'm a California taxpayer and I'm an attorney. And I was very pleased today to see in the climate change coherent approach that was presented that CalPERS is committing to develop policies to routinely identify economically attractive investment opportunities to enhance returns and reduce emissions. That's great. That's the first half of what needs to be done. What this coherent approach should also include is a commitment to developing policies to routinely identify and eliminate investments that reduce returns and increase emissions. I'm not going to talk about how the fossil fuel industry increases emissions. That's their business model. That's how they make money. What I'm here to talk about is how those investments reduce CalPERS returns. As we've heard from Robert, ExxonMobil has been a very bad investment over the last 10 years. But that's not just Exxon, it's other fossil fuel companies as well. Last year in 2018, the energy sector was dead last on the S&P 500. In 2017, it was second to last. In 2018, the S&P 500 index ended down 4% for the year, with the energy sector declining more than 18% for the year. Independent studies have shown that New York State's pension fund lost large sums over the last 10 years by failing to divest from fossil fuels, an estimated loss of almost $20,000 per member. Another study showed that if Massachusetts pension fund, its $1.6 billion in fossil fuel stocks, had instead been invested in a fossil-free index from 2012 to 2017, its assets, those assets would have grown by more than 50%, or another $1 billion, instead of suffering losses. There's no reason to believe that the CalPERS fossil fuel holdings, such as in ExxonMobil, are any different from those in New York and in Massachusetts. In fact, 3 years ago, Trillium Asset Management estimated that CalPERS had lost $3 billion due to their holdings in equity assets in the world's 200 largest coal, oil, and gas companies in 2014-15, a year when most of its other investments rose in value. The fiscal, political, regulatory, and litigation risks have grown substantially in those last 3 years, with volatility and downward trajectory of returns from fossil fuel industry continuing. I'm an attorney. I know what it means to be a fiduciary for a beneficiary, and I believe that you are starting CalPERS board to fail your beneficiaries.
Ma'am, you need to complete
and not
your remarks.
to correctly follow your fiduciary duty towards the people of California who are relying on you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, Sheila Thorne.
Yeah. Good morning. I'm a retired member of the California Faculty Association and also a member of RPEA. And I'm concerned about the effectiveness of shareholder engagement with the fossil fuel companies. Research shows that between 2012 and 2018, 160 climate change shareholder resolutions were filed at 21 U.S. gas and oil companies, yet not one of these companies has adopted targets to limit their full life cycle contribution of greenhouse emissions. Presently, ExxonMobil is even trying to block a joint proposal by the Church of England and the New York State pension funds to set targets to align with the Paris Agreement. And according to Reuters, the world's top 24 oil companies have collectively spent only 1% of their 2018 budgets on clean energy. In fact, Exxon's commitment to renewable energy is mostly a commitment to deploying it to run its expanded oil and gas extraction, especially in the Texas Permian Basin, where it has outlined an aggressive growth plan for the next 10 years to triple its daily production. It also plans to expand production in Guyana and start up 25 new projects worldwide. In the next 10 years, U.S. companies are on track to account for 60% of world growth in oil and gas production, expanding 4 times more than any other country. This expansion ignores climate action engagement goals, as well as increases the risk of stranded assets. Another supposed argument for engagement is that the fossil fuel companies will become the green companies of the future because of their huge capital capabilities to invest in renewables. However, Chevron's equity stakes in solar, wind, and geothermal production amounts to enough power for no more than 113,000 homes, next to nothing, in other words. ExxonMobil has dedicated $1 billion per year to basic research in low-carbon technologies, but this is only 2% of its spending on oil and gas exploration, and these projects are all at least 10 years away from any possible implementation. These are the 10 years in which both the UN Climate Report and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change say action must be taken to limit global temperature rise before it is too late to stop catastrophic change. I think it's plain to see that oil companies have not turned greener, and they have not invested to any significant degree in green industries despite shareholder engagement. And it's time that we acknowledge that shareholder engagement has proved ineffective in reforming an industry that must fundamentally change its product.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
The next 5 speakers are Christine Shoemaker, Lawrence Wilson, Martha Turner, Jane Scantlebury, and Shep Harper. Ms. Shoemaker, you may begin.
So my name is Christine Shoemaker. I'm a member of Fossil Free California and a retired plant molecular biologist. And I want to thank you today for your efforts that you described for climate change, particularly those relating to economic inequality. As a scientist, the science is clear. Climate change poses an existential threat to human society and all the ecosystems we rely on. I won't belabor that. What I do want to say is that California, as a state, does recognize the threat and urgency to act on climate change and has indicated through legislative and executive actions the desire for fossil fuels to be rapidly phased out. This includes an executive order signed by Governor Brown in September of 2018, which targets carbon neutrality by 2045, and numerous bills, including SB 32 and SB 100, which set goals for 40% reduction of carbon emissions below 1990 levels by 2030 and 100% clean electricity by 2045. My suggestion is that CalPERS should align their investment with these goals, both for the urgent reasons to address climate change, but also to align their portfolio with the economy that these legislative and executive actions will create. Essentially, why would you invest in that which the state is trying to eliminate? California is not the only state to have these measures. Hawaii was the first state in the nation to set a deadline for clean electricity, and after the signing of SB 100 last year, a number of other states, including New Mexico, are considering such actions. States are taking actions. Countries are taking actions, some countries. So I urge you strongly to consider a fossil-free portfolio for CalPERS and rapidly, and to align your portfolio with the fossil fuel-free economy that's coming, and rapidly. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Lawrence Wilson.
Board members and staff, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. My name's Lawrence Wilson. I'm a PERS retiree. I retired at the end of 2008 from CAL FIRE after 24 years with the state. First, I want to thank you for your efforts that have made my retirement a great success. I'd not be living the life I have today without your hard work, all of you. I believe that sustainability of investments as a strategy is very important. We live in a world of finite resources, and there must be limits to growth if we expect future generations to have the same opportunities that we do. And so I want to thank you for your interest in sustainable investing. Several years ago, I determined to reallocate my own small amount of investments away from fossil fuels and into sustainable renewable energy. It's scary reallocating when every step of the way your advisor is warning you against it. So I understand the pressure that you are under to go with the standard way of doing business. But there's a high risk that fossil fuel assets will be left stranded, and that this will affect other closely associated industries. There are two reasons for this. The main reason is that fossil fuels are now more expensive for energy generation than solar, wind, and battery systems. And most of the growth in the energy sector is in renewables. The truth is that fossil fuels are being disrupted by renewables. Already, European utilities have written down about $150 billion in stranded assets in the form of fossil fuel installations that are no longer needed. The other risk to fossil fuel investments comes from public policy. When climate change becomes a defining issue for financial stability, public policy decisions will move the energy sector quickly away from fossil fuels. And that is very likely to begin happening in the early 2020s in this country when change comes to our political system and the Green New Deal is launched. I hope that you will reallocate investments from the fossil fuel sector. It will be good for our bottom line and good for the sustainability of our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Ms. Turner.
Martha Turner, and I'm a board member also of Fossil Free California, and just recently have joined the ranks of households that are receiving a pension from CalPERS, so we're very appreciative of the activity that's gone on here. A few of you know that I have been observing CalPERS in the light of climate change through that lens for about 6 years now. And I also want to express my admiration of the work and dedication of the staff both in this arena. What I'd like to pose to you today, especially in light of the discussions that are happening around reconsidering the idea of the pillars and the possible expansion of the use of private equity, I'd like to offer a somewhat different perspective, maybe a conceptual reframing of how to look at investing. And I'm calling them the 4 R's: risk, resilience, respect, and reverence. Risk you're familiar with. Resilience, you're in the process of continuing to develop a portfolio that is resilient over time. Respect, you show that respect through your environmental, social, and governance activity. But reverence, where does that come in on this kind of a calculation? I'd like to suggest that it's a deepening and a more full understanding of respect, and that it deepens and understands interconnectivity in ways that we have only begun to explore, but through the ESG effort and through also some of the integration that's happening in the investment office. I'd like to offer the idea that if we can increase that perspective of understanding interconnectivity in new ways, we will open up fresh approaches to understanding how to invest these large portfolios for the benefit of people such as myself and some of my other colleagues here. And I'd also like to address very quickly a few thoughts about metrics, because as I've learned over the years of observing the activity here, I've become to really understand a little bit more about how important metrics are in the work that's done here. So if you're taking a peek at reverence and you're taking a peek at interconnectivity, what might be the arenas that you could develop more metrics in? I'd like to suggest that that could be in more fully understanding ecosystem indicators, more fully understanding public health indicators, more fully looking at social and emotional well-being, essentially mental health. And I think if there can be a deeper dive into those arenas and then linking that, as we've heard earlier in a somewhat different way, but linking that with investment decisions, we'll be actually implementing a better understanding of interconnectivity, and we'll be investing in reverence in how we manage the life energy that's embodied in our financials. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Ms. Scantlebury.
My name is Jane Scantlebury, and I'm a CalPERS retiree, retired public librarian. And I want you to think about how CalPERS, under your leadership, could truly influence the movement to stop climate change by divesting from fossil fuels and contribute to saving our civilization. Clearly, there is a growing movement against climate change inaction. Look at the students all over Europe and now here in the US and on other continents as well, building forces to insist on having a future on Earth. In the 70s and 80s, the movement to divest from companies doing business in the South African apartheid government forced the University of California divestment, which was so significant that it became the driving force for divestment worldwide in all companies doing business in apartheid South Africa. This was in 1986, and the dismantling of apartheid began in 1990. The overthrow of apartheid is part of world history, and UC's divestment is part of that success. If CalPERS, as the largest investment fund in the US, was to divest from fossil fuels, it would qualitatively influence the investments of other large institutions and change the destructive direction of our climate. It would be a significant contribution to history.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Harper.
Hello. Excuse me. Hello, members of the board. I'll be brief. My name's Shep Harper, and I'm a PERS retiree, so I thank all of you and all of you at PERS for that. I spent my career in the fire service, retiring at the rank of captain. I'm sure it will be no news to any of you that in recent years we've seen an alarming increase in the severity of fires throughout the state. Certainly one of the factors in that increase is climate change. I would just ask the board to consider divestment from fossil fuels as a step in protecting this great state of California and the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all your comments. The next 5 speakers are Sarah Theis, Dana Stokes, Lynn Nittler, Karen Jacques, and Christine Nelson. Ms. Theis?
Thank you. My name is Sarah Theis. I'm on the board of Fossil Free California. I'm a CalPERS retiree, and I'm a member of RPEA. We understand that you take your fiduciary duty to members very seriously. We also know that, like all Californians, you're experiencing climate change and care deeply about the future of our state. In the past, you may have felt conflicted between your fiduciary duty and the need to take drastic actions to curb global warming. Today, we suggest that this conflict no longer exists, and you can meet your fiduciary duty by pursuing a fossil-free investment strategy. New York City is a case study in how a complex system like CalPERS can pursue such a strategy. And the take-home lesson is that it is a process. In 2018, New York City announced that it was divesting from fossil fuels, but the process actually began in 2012 after Superstorm Sandy, when the trustees commissioned a study on whether it could divest from fossil fuel reserve owners consistent with its fiduciary duties. And the mayor's chief pension officer said explicitly, we cannot sacrifice risk-adjusted returns for non-economic reasons. The next thing they did was solicit a report on climate-related financial risk to the portfolio. And then last December, they issued an RFP for a financial analysis and to produce a financial analysis and suggest a prudent strategy to divest from fossil fuel reserve owners. And in addition, they are getting an opinion from the trustees have asked for a legal opinion on whether the divestment process will align with fiduciary duty. So my point is that this is a long process. They started in 2012, and they haven't even gotten to the point that they've actually made the decision to divest, although that is their intention. Obviously, there's differences between their portfolio and CalPERS. Theirs is generally smaller, but I think that that basically similar steps could be taken, and they have forged a path. The final thing I want to say is that I was happy to see all the changes, the increase in staff in the Sustainable Investing Division, but I think given CalPERS' complexity, the rapidity of climate change, and the example of New York City, given all that, CalPERS may want to put more resources into the problem of fossil fuel investments. And I've submitted a report that I got the New York City information from to the board members. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your comments. Ms. Stokes.
My name is Dana Stokes, and in the early 80s, I worked with state energy managers during what some consider the first oil crisis to develop energy management plans to reduce state energy consumption. And more recently, I worked for CalRecycle to reduce waste and divert it from landfills. As a retired state worker, the pension paycheck I receive every month directly reflects the investment decisions that CalPERS makes on my behalf, and that of approximately 1.5 million other CalPERS beneficiaries. I applaud the CalPERS board and investment staff for its investments in well-performing sectors, including energy efficiency and renewable energy, that are reducing greenhouse gas emissions, improving the health of our planet, and mitigating climate change. But I am deeply concerned about CalPERS' continued investment in fossil fuels. As others have mentioned, a growing body of economic research indicates that fossil fuel investments are becoming increasingly risky. I've been asking myself a lot lately, how is CalPERS upholding its fiduciary responsibility to us beneficiaries by retaining investments in this increasingly risky market sector? A July 2018 report from the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis explains the numerous factors increasing risk for fossil fuel investors. Some of those risk factors are: demand for fossil fuels will decrease as signatory countries to the Paris Climate Accord implement their carbon footprint reduction plans. The oil and gas industry faces growing competition from cheaper renewable energy and electric vehicles, all of which are continuing to fall in price relative to fossil fuels. Global economic growth is shifting from energy-intensive manufacturing and industrial models to more service-oriented, higher technology models with lower energy intensity. Campaigns against fossil fuels are gaining in scope, sophistication, and success. Litigation is mounting against fossil fuel companies for facilitating climate change and for misleading investors about the role of fossil fuels in climate change. And the oil and gas industry and its investors face potential huge losses in the form of stranded assets. To avoid these risks and uphold its fiduciary responsibility to all CalPERS beneficiaries,
Ma'am, you need to complete your remarks, please.
I urge CalPERS to phase out its fossil fuel investments and invest those funds instead in the energy efficiency and renewable energy sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Nittler.
Hi, I'm Lynn Nittler from Davis, a retired teacher and a member of Fossil Free California. My retirement is with CalSTRS, but my health care is with CalPERS, so I thank you for that, and your actions do matter to me. The climate news grows steadily worse. None of us, I think, has forgotten the fires last fall or the drought of the years before that. New research reported in the Sacramento Bee just yesterday warned of 6 feet, not merely 1.5 feet, of rising sea levels that will impact our coast with flooding of homes, airports, ports, businesses, utilities. It's not good news. Our children now understand the threat to their only home. 15 kids in Davis gathered for the youth climate strike last Friday, joining hundreds of thousands more in over 100 U.S. cities and 112 countries around the world. They're universal in wanting a future on a healthy planet. The photographs are stunning online. My point is, it's time for CalPERS to take climate change seriously too and begin to divest from fossil fuels. You won't be alone, and most likely it will turn out to be a wise financial move. Approximately 6% of CalPERS holdings are in the top 100 fossil fuel companies. Fossil fuel stocks are poor performers, earning less than the overall stock indices. In 2018, the energy sector was the lowest in the S&P 500 index. While returns are declining, fiscal, political, regulatory, and litigation risks are growing, making this sector increasingly unsound investment. I too was looking at New York City, and I heard their announcement of the intention to divest from fossil fuels in person at the climate conference a year ago in September in San Francisco. Their retirement system is the largest municipal pension system in the U.S., $194 billion. So that's about half the worth of CalPERS, so it's significant. They're progressing towards that. Here's a quote: New York City's decision shows that divestment isn't scary, it's practical. A way to think about it. That's Bill McKibben. The state of Massachusetts pension fund is also considering divestment at this point. There will be a bill sponsored in 2019, and it's based on these criteria. Some more food for thought. Meeting an obligation to future generations to minimize the impact of climate change. Oh, I'm out of time, I'm not. Avoiding the dangers of the carbon bubble. Meeting state priorities to support renewable energy. Divesting as a sound financial strategy. Divesting as a proven tool for change.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. Ms. Jacques, I may not pronounce your name correctly.
Good morning. I'm Karen Jacques. I'm a retired psychologist. My husband is a PERS retiree, and we both get our health care from CalPERS. And I appreciate the opportunity to comment today, and I appreciate work that has been done on sustainability. And so much of what I plan to say has already been said that I strongly second all of that. And I want to add, we are in a time of climate crisis, of rapid climate tipping points. We are also at a point of tipping where the public is becoming aware and demanding that something be done. Children all over the world are walking out of schools demanding that something be done. Litigation is growing to force the issue. The future is in renewables. It is not in fossil fuels. To continue to invest in them is to invest in stranded assets, in massive environmental injustice to frontline communities, and to the continued extinction of species. This is an opportunity to mindfully and immediately begin to pull out of your fossil fuel investments. Over the last 5 years, fossil fuel investments have been the slowest growing sector in the stock market. The investments in fracking are estimated by the International Energy Agency to be $200 billion in debt and getting ready to collapse. Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, has been warning of stranded assets. This is now your opportunity to act and to begin to do it immediately and planfully. And as a last comment, we are now in a climate crisis. We are facing the potential extinction of our civilizations if we don't act. IPCC has said that we have probably no more than 10 to 12 years to take massive actions to move from fossil fuels to clean energy. There is a movement, the other use of fossil fuels is in plastics. There is a growing movement to regulate and end the use of plastics. So please act now. It is also a profound moral and ethical issue for the continuation of life on Earth in any way that we would recognize as livable. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Ms. Nelson.
Yes, I was a public health nurse for Butte County, and I'm a PERS retiree. I feel the sense of urgency that I hope each of you also feel regarding this. You know, prior to the fire on November 8th, I was worried about tick-borne illnesses, mosquito-borne illnesses, the crash of pollinator species, because I live in Chico, and these things were all around me. But when the whole town of Paradise burned down, and the surrounding communities on November 8th, far after the time it should have rained, when our town became totally overwhelmed with climate refugees, when I saw the suffering and the intensity of what these people are going through, have lost everything. You know, 85 people lost their lives. Many more have lost their mental health. And our town is just absolutely overwhelmed. And it really brought it home to me that we have to do something. This is a crisis, and it's happening now. I struggled to drive down here with all the gasoline-powered cars to get here. Then I struggled to find a charger for my car because it's an electric car, and that's why I was late getting here. And I'm not just saying divest from fossil fuels. I'm saying make good investments in the future, which is things like solar that will charge these cars, get this industry moving, make it work, because we have to do something, and we have to do it now. You know, we can't just rely on children in the streets telling us what we should already know. You are investing money that I do not give you permission to spend on fossil fuels. I want a future for our beautiful planet and for our children and grandchildren, and I respect each of you as a thinking and thoughtful and moral person. So I hope that you'll work as hard as you possibly can, and I'm sorry to lecture you, but I really, really think that we don't have 12 years. It's happening now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Hutchings, you signed up for 7B, but if you'd like to speak on 9A on this item, you certainly may. Okay. And thank you all for your participation and your comments. We're going to take up 7B after lunch. So.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Dane Hutchings with the League of California Cities. I was planning on speaking on the other item. Unfortunately, I have to depart, so I feel like this is still a pretty appropriate venue to talk about divestment, given that's been the lion's share of the conversation this afternoon. And I first want to say that I absolutely respect the folks who came up and provided some impassioned pleas. I'm certainly guilty of doing the same, of providing impassioned pleas to focus on investment returns and maximizing your investment returns, and so I certainly see the merit there. I think I'd start off just by saying that from the League's perspective, it is your charge to continue to be laser focused on returns. It is not your charge to modify state and federal policy that regulates these industries. I'm just doing a quick rundown. Folks that sort of perhaps may have a better charge of that would be the U.S. Department of Environment, the Environmental Consortium, the Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Natural Resources, the California EPA, the California Natural Resources Board, the California Coastal Commission, and maybe the California Resources Board as well. I think those are all better suited for what we should be doing or not doing with fossil fuels. CalPERS should be focused on maximizing their returns for the folks who are relying on their retirement. What do we say to the retirees whose health cares are eliminated, whose pensions can be reduced by upwards of 80%, and they have nothing? Sorry that you lost your retirement, but at least we didn't invest in fossil fuels, guns, tobacco, big banks, or plastics. One of the rationales that I've heard a couple of times was there's pending litigation against fossil fuel companies, and so therefore, it's prudent to divest. That's the same thing. That was the same justification that was used to divesting from tobacco, and that's cost about $10 or $12 billion, and it continues to grow. When it comes to retirement security, there are no moral victories. We have to understand what our charge is here. Protect the active employees and protect the retirees and protect the employers who can employ these folks that can provide services to the public. This is beyond the scope of this board to decide how to change the world. I swear, if we could invest in rainbows and unicorns and we can make money, I would be all in. But right now, we are at a critical juncture. We talk about the next 15 years of our planet. I'm talking about the next 10 to 5 years where cities are going to be going bankrupt, and they absolutely need your assistance to be able to provide employees, retirees, and those folks with their retirement security and their health care benefits. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for your comments. We're now going to take a lunch break. We're going to pick back up with item 9B, and we're going to do that at 1:35. So we're in recess till 1:35. Thank you.